It's my privilege now to introduce Sundram Sivamalai. Sundram is a Professor of Emotional Wellbeing Institute in Geneva. He's received the Centenary Medallion for his work with migrants and was instrumental in the establishment of our own BRMC, Ballarat Region Multicultural Council. Welcome, Sundram. Prue Bentley is from our own ABC. She manages the western region of the ABC Ballarat, Chief of Staff. The ABC is Australia's most trusted source of public interest media for truth, not for profit. Are you ready, Sundram?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'll hand over to you, Prue. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you so much, and welcome to this special event. It's so nice to see so many of you coming out on a cold Ballarat night to mark Refugee Week and also to talk about this special book that was written by someone you may already know as a man who's worked tirelessly over many years in service to the community. Over the decades, Sundram Sivamalai has held pivotal roles in education, health and business. And of course, you probably know he's volunteered extensively to support migrants and new arrivals in their settlement journey. Much of that work has happened right here in Ballarat. Now, you may know something of Sundram's professional life and passions, but tonight I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy as much as I did learning about what has driven those dreams and goals over his lifetime. This book, One Dream, Four Countries, is, in my opinion, a really valuable book. It holds within it so much of the story of modern globalism. It captures the late 20th century migrant experience so well through one man's journey. It's an important story to tell now. For Sundram, of course, it's a chance to reflect on his life and achievements. And I will get to you in just a sec. I just want to say this. I think it's really important to hear these stories in a time where, as Wendy was saying, migration policy, refugee policy, it's coming under huge pressure from special interest and ideological groups here and in other first world nations. Many of those nations have benefited enormously from the expertise, grit and entrepreneurship of migrants and refugees. And that contribution is often minimised or given just tokenistic consideration by policymakers. And in a year when we're probably expecting another federal election, I'm certain that this is going to be one of those times. One Dream, Four Countries connects us to this shared story of migration. And I'm hoping that we can share that with you tonight. If you haven't read the book, I recommend you do. But if not, we are going to go through some of the things that Sundram has written about, and I think that they will say a lot about our country and our culture. So welcome, Sundram.
Thank you so much, Prue, and thank you to the audience who have made an effort to come around this evening. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land upon which we are holding this event, and also to pay our respects to the elders past and present. With that note, I'm quite happy for your questions, Prue.
All right, well, the first one really is, do you remember when you decided to write this book? What was it that really sparked that idea?
The idea came about following my presentations with groups of school children, teachers and community groups, where I got invited to come along and share a story, of your multicultural background and so forth. So when I was trying to look for a theme or a story to tell, particularly children love stories, and so I related the story. We call the person Sunny, and this is what Sunny's style, and in between telling the story, I interlinked. If you know that Sunny comes from a very different culture, he doesn't have a table to sit. So he sits on the floor and uses his fingers to eat. Doesn't have the fork and knife, that sort of thing. So that links up. So it's the public motivation, that made me to go back. Okay, I might write this, and also it was also relief. The journey gave me relief from the emotions and the traumas that I was enduring for a while.
You were barely more than a child when you left Malaysia. You were 17.
I was 17, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
And you probably won't mind me saying, pretty naive, as most of us are at 17, when you embark on a great journey.
Yep.
And the story of you at the train station in Kuala Lumpur, wasn't it? And you're getting on this train to Singapore and you haven't really organised anything. You're turning up to a friend's house and you haven't even told him you're coming.
That's right.
That's an incredibly brave thing to do, but can you take us back there? What was that like?
It was 10:30 at night, and the train, was going to leave in about 20 minutes. But the relatives, mainly relatives, all gathered around and crying their hearts out not to leave. But being 17, I thought, okay, these things are not going to change for me. I'll make a break. I think if the situation is not going to change for you, and no one is going to come and give you assistance, so all you can do is, move yourself from the situation. And I was at the bottom of the barrel, Even I stay there or don't stay there, it's not going to make a big difference. So at 17, yes, coming from a very, awkward village, and then trying to get to Singapore, I never thought what was Singapore going to look like, but prepared to take the punt, certainly took the gamble.
You experienced a lot of hardship there, though. It certainly wasn't a dream scenario. And I got the impression, it's obviously pretty stratified society, and as a Malaysian without a work visa, you were basically doing all of the jobs nobody else wanted to do.
Correct. Although I had the school certificate education, and people at my level in those days with that qualifications were, holding pretty, good desk positions. But then I was nowhere near it. In Singapore, they had very strict rules. If you were to come in without a work permit, you have to return and then, to your country and get stamped again for another 2 weeks visa. So I was also breaking the rules. I did not, in some cases, I didn't go back. And not only me, so was my friend. Okay, let's skip this week. We'll go to the next week because we save another few dollars from the bus fare, traveling into Malaysia and then stamping and coming back. So yes, it was a tough time.
How did you keep positive, though? Because, reading those stories where you couldn't even find accommodation, you were sleeping on people's floors, you were facing abuse, you were doing some pretty hairy jobs that didn't pay particularly well. How did you keep going?
Yes, as I said, I believed in my God, Ganesha. And so it's that hope and the dream that these things will be temporary in time to come. I can always reflect on it, so that I had the motivation to keep going because I really wanted to do further studies. So that was one thing that kept me going, and I pursued.
Yeah, well, I do want to ask you about this because I was going to ask about this later, but I'm going to ask about it now. I get the impression, just reading this book, and as you go through, obviously you go through more than 4 countries. It's actually a few more than that. But at every turn there is hardship. At every turn you are overcoming some really significant hurdles, and you don't seem to want to take the easy way out, because there was always the opportunity to go home. You could have gone back to your family, for better or for worse, where you knew the culture and you knew the people, and you know, you could have slotted back in there, but you didn't. You chose to forge through. What drives you to do that? Like, how do you get to that point?
I think we all have some sort of interest in our community and the well-being of our community. In my early days, yes, I was driving myself to maximize my potentials. And then once I've reached that, then I'm driving myself to see how I could be of help to others, you know. So at one stage, I was the recipient of the help of the community, and later, currently, I'm more of a donor than a recipient, you know, of the well-being of our community. And the drive is in, you know, right from the beginning, you know, you look for it and then you see a little bit of glimpse or hope you want to do something. And I always believe, go for it, give it a shot. I don't like the word to go back and say, I should have done that, I should have done that. When you have a moment, sometimes things may not be ideal, but then you have to take the challenge, you know, to do the best in that circumstances. So, and there are some examples that I've been through.
From Singapore, you had a huge cultural shift.
Correct.
You managed to get yourself help me here. It was Dundee, that's right, Dundee in Scotland, and you got yourself a grant or a scholarship to basically go and learn nursing in Scotland. You write really well about the kind of cultural shocks, and they're not big ones, they're really little ones. How did you deal with that? How did you navigate that, coming from a place, I mean, we're talking about late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, 70s. Yeah,
70s, yeah. Where, you know, we don't have the kinds of access to information about other
Correct.
cultures that we do now. So you were, in so many ways, you were coming to them for the very first time and having to kind of make it up as you went along.
Correct.
How did you go with that?
It was a difficult time. I think now I can relate that some of those experiences I can see now when migrants come here, that I can relate to them, the challenges they have, you know, not necessarily only just feeding themselves, but also how to mix, how to socialize, you know. What are the norms? What is expected to be rude? You know, what is accepted, you know, in a communal settings and so forth. So when I was in Dundee, well, you have to use the fork and knife. You want to eat fish and chips. The chips are okay. You can, you know, put the fork in it. But how are you going to eat the crumbled fish with the fork and knife? Then the first time I was trying to, you know, try to grab it with my fork, the whole thing fell to pieces, right? So that's one example, and I can relate to you several examples. And I remember I have to get into the bed, but then the bed was what? You had the dune and everything, then I was lying on top. And I think this is a very cold bed here. I might actually break the rule. I'll try to get into under the sheets, and that's supposed to be the norm, okay? So there you are. So that's, you know, but luckily, I was managed to be helped by a few of the friends, you know, in the class. And so I had a good Scottish friend, Ken, yep. And he used to come along, Sundram, we do this here and we do that there. And a few of them say, it is not thank you, you know, thank you. You know, you have to have that, you know, intonation and the pronunciations a little bit differently, you know. But remember, in Dundee, first time you're arriving there with a Scottish accent, and this is Dundonian's accent, you know. They're not easy to comprehend, you know. But that's it. You have there, but you have to survive somehow. And I was, you know, in Dundee for 1 month, and trying to guess what people are talking, right? and giving a smile, this is where we come when I have migrants coming in here, when they smile and they nod their head, doesn't mean they completely understand. And that was what I was doing, being very polite. Yeah, and then go home, look at the books and see what was the chapter about, the teacher was doing, reading up. It was, it was in a way enjoyable. The culture is new, but at the same time, you can see there's always a level of anxiety in you because it's not your norm. It's not your normal setting. Even to go for a meal or even to go out, all this is very different.
You're working twice as hard as the next
I'm working
person, aren't
twice
you?
hard.
Yeah.
So I have to make it up, what I pretend to do outside so that I'm following the norm, cultural norm. I have to go back to the room and look it up and read up, things like that.
How welcoming was Scotland?
Sorry?
How welcoming was Scotland to migrants?
I still have very fond memories of Scotland. People were lovely, very helpful. If it's not for the Scottish to give me the opportunity to tap into my potentials, I won't be here today.
Yeah, and then obviously you went to the UK, and you've done work all around the world.
Yep, recently, yes. I mean,
Yes.
I took a chance and traveled around the world and with my wife, and we enjoyed the culture, and then I could reflect on, how I can now begin to appreciate and understand the challenges and also the charms of different cultures.
I wonder though, I mean, you talk about Scotland giving you a break. They paid for you to study, and you had to work for a little while, and from there you were able to gain more qualifications through the United Kingdom education system.
Correct.
Do you reflect on that as a sort of the golden era, I guess, for
I would say that was the turning point in my career. They gave me the scholarship to go and do my university entrance from the Dundee City Council, and following on that, they gave me a scholarship to do 4 years honours in zoology, and they also did give me a scholarship. The scholarship came late to do my MBA at Edinburgh University, but meanwhile, I've left the country. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to the Scottish people.
Looking at you now, though, I mean, you have had you've had a long and successful career. You're sort of well respected within the community. You've reached a position of success. But if we go back to when you were very little, I think people would be a little bit surprised about your roots. Sundram, do you think?
I'm sure. I mean, I didn't have any interest, or even I didn't have the ambition or the dream that what I'm going to be. I was just floating around because you don't have anything. You don't have shoes. You don't have clothes to wear.
But your mother couldn't read or write.
She couldn't. Yeah, she was illiterate.
Yeah.
And 6 children and 6 in the family. So there you are. And lost my father at 4. And when you don't have enough to eat, the family becomes very dysfunctional.
Did that shape you? Do you think that's what drove you? Because you were you the youngest, the very youngest?
I was the youngest.
Yes, the very
I'm
youngest
number
of
6.
6.
Yeah. But again, sometimes it gives you the strength. You draw upon, look at yourself and say, hey, you're not bad after all. You are here and you are here, all right? So you're moving on. So that gave me the strength. And also one of the things that prevented, I had a big ambition. One ambition I had was to study. But because of my financial circumstances, I couldn't continue the study. So that was the burning desire in me. How could I reach it? How could I get there? Yeah.
And how do you feel your mum would respond to seeing you today?
she'd be very delighted, and she'd be absolutely elated. But then she'd also have some regrets because the first racist I came across in my life was my mum. Because of her Hindu cultural background, there were differences, you know. But I think once you understand things have changed, we have to accept people they are as they are, and to see where we can have some common grounds, you know, to appreciate each other's cultures and differences.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in your description of your wedding and getting married, which to me sounded like really hard situation, because you went from Scotland, you met Suba, you courted kind of in secret for a little while.
Yep.
So take us through why that was such a difficult process.
Correct, yeah. As you know, that when you talk about Hindus, I mean, Indians got so many subcultures, and Suba comes from another, you know, subculture, and I'm a Tamil-speaking culture, and she's a Malayalam-speaking culture. And again, the cultures have their own expectations, you know. They expect someone from their culture, you know, to be their future son-in-law. In my case, they expected me to have someone from my Tamil culture to have a daughter-in-law or, you know, part of the family. Yeah. So that was the challenge. So as the sort of thing, and I didn't have an idea how this is all going to end up, but I took the punt and went ahead, and certainly, yep, there were a lot of challenges. I think people who will be reading that chapter will see a fair bit of challenges there. I have disclosed that quite openly.
And you speak pretty frankly about some members of your family as well, both your close family and your
of course.
Extended family.
I think after the wedding, it was not the problem that we had between us, but it was all the problems caused by the relatives, the in-laws, you know.
I think that's pretty universal, though, Sundram, at most weddings.
Well, yes, universal, but this one here, I think you can see the tables were already, you know, turning against you right from the word go, because here's a man just arrived, you know, he's arrived from UK, and he's going to get married to my sister. That's my brother-in-law now. And again, then the family side thinking, wow, he's not, you know, he's not of our kind. He's different, you know. He's coming to marry her now, you know. And we had all these excellent proposals, you know. And then he's coming and going to take away, you know, our girl. Yeah.
So you successfully married Suba. You took her back to Scotland, had a little boy, and then everything changed again.
Yep.
Why is it that when you've just had a child, or you've had a huge milestone in your life, we make these decisions to uproot and move halfway across the continent, or move houses, or do something, change our jobs? What is it about this time of life that you think makes us want to make these huge life decisions?
Correct. When I finished my honours, I was offered to do my PhD at Aberdeen University. And as I said, I was also offered the MBA at Edinburgh. But in between, we've decided, I think what I thought was, okay, I've done my bachelor's. Where is it a place that we could go and utilize the skills that I've learned, the education I've done, at the same time also to pursue further studies, you know, if the opportunity is there. And we explored Papua New Guinea, Brunei, and Australia. And we decided to come to Australia because Suba's brother, oldest brother, my brother-in-law, was doing his PhD in engineering. So that made our choice a bit easier. And I thought, we have someone there, we could at least, you know, settle in and socialize ourselves into the culture.
And what was it like when you first came to Australia? Late 70s or early 80s?
80s, early 80s. Yes, I came to Australia and
It was Brisbane,
in
hot.
Brisbane. Yep. I can remember 1982, we left Aberdeen on the 12th of November. We arrived in Brisbane on the 14th of November. When we left Aberdeen, the airport, it was snowing and there was knee-depth snow. And when we arrived in Brisbane, it was 35 degrees. And we didn't have time to take our clothes off and change to something light. So I still had my, all my suit and everything. And yeah, it was a big difference from one climate to another climate. And yep, came to Brisbane, was very tropical. And certainly we remember my son had his, 3 months old son had his whole skin peeled off with the heat and all that. So yeah, he had to be cared for, a couple of weeks before he got better.
And obviously I'm skipping ahead a little bit because you're here in Ballarat now. So you went Brisbane, Sydney, Ballarat, the best place,
Yep.
of course, to be. And you stayed here. What made you decide that Ballarat was going to be the place that you stopped moving? Because, I mean, your whole life has been about moving and shifting and taking the next opportunity.
Correct. I came to Ballarat with the position offered at the university here. So after coming here, I thought, okay, we were in Sydney for a year when I was doing my master's at the University of New South Wales. After coming to Ballarat, I felt, okay, it's a good place to bring the children up. Then I was employed and my wife was
It's a
employed.
little bit more like Scotland than it is
Of course.
Brisbane, isn't it?
Of course. And then I saw, okay, while I'm here, might as well do something, at this point in time. So here I took on the employment in 1987, 6th of January, and then called Ballarat College of Advanced Education. So then the life began then, and after a year I thought, okay, what is it that I could also do to the community so that the passion for the community is always there. So that's when I explored, and we formed the Ballarat Asian Australian Association. Then from then on, that grew bigger, and then we called it the Central Highlands Asian Australian Association. And then from then on, then we had a big meeting, and with the support of the Ballarat City Council, the Victorian Multicultural Commission, and the Ethnic Communities Council of Australia, of Victoria, we formed the Ballarat Regional Multicultural Council. And so that provided a connection, a point of connection for people coming from, Asian background, or people coming in for first time into Ballarat, and also people living in Ballarat, to connect so that there are some cultural understanding and cultural, what do you call, cohabitat, for harmony. Yeah.
It is interesting that these associations, obviously there are migrants living in communities. There are always migrants living in communities, but associations like these are kind of pivotal in making migrants visible to the broader society. And you kind of mentioned a bit about connection there. What do you think the Regional Multicultural Society, the Ballarat Asian and Australian Society, all of those sort of iterations of that group, what do you think is the big legacy of those groups?
I think the main link in all this, the theme behind that is having that connection with people, having that connection with people who may come here for the first time. And let's not, the same thing when we have our refugees and the asylum seekers here. So many of them who come here have got great expectations, and don't forget, these people are also coming with skills, and they may have held, and they still hold prominent positions, in several of these countries they come from. And then we have to look at, in some ways, in capitalizing, in making, use of these skills, So I think it's a little bit, still ongoing issue where we are not looking at and tapping into some of the migrants. We have to look at these people who are coming with, as migrants, that they are our asset. Don't look at them as liabilities. Look at what they have, and if you were to give them a support in the beginning, you're going to draw a lot of benefits. And there are so many examples now how migrants who have come in here have contributed, have made the country, a better place, And they've shown us, shown us different ways how to do business, shown us how to do, teaching and learning with a different style, and how to live and how to cook, all these sort of things.
So why do you think it is that we are seeing such a shift on a world scale, I guess? We've seen it with Trump, we've seen it with some of these autocratic leaders, a very protectionist, anti-globalist migration agenda.
I would put down one key factor is to educate them, right? I think that was happening in Ballarat in the late 80s when I was here. You can see the way that they actually treated some of the newcomers here and the people who owned business when they didn't look like, white Anglo-Saxon. They had a hard time. But I think you don't go for tit for tat, but I think look at a way of how to engage them, show them the way, Some of them need a bit more education. But even some of the world leaders, they may hold a lot of high positions, but I think when you're looking down and searching their soul, do they still have compassionate about some of the people who are, seeking for help and looking for support, So this is something that we really have to do. And my role as the Emotional Wellbeing Institute, Geneva, I'm looking for ways how we can improve the emotional well-being of people across the globe. And let's face it, we are the signatories to the UNHCR, but I think we are still failing in our role. We are not in the top brackets, and we have a long way to go, but certainly we have come a bit of the way. I think we still have to educate our, community. Of course, there are community who are crying, but unless the community has a platform to, to say the words and the audience to hear it, unless that happens, we'll still have a challenge in our hands. And the Refugee Week is a good example. And we have leaders here today taking on the role without failure. And I take my hat, for the perseverance and the, and the ongoing challenge.
And the fact that it's very much run by volunteers as well. I think that it speaks volumes.
Yep.
In the Australian community. I'd like to open the floor up for questions. If anyone has a question for Sundram, I've got heaps because I find him fascinating, but obviously I don't want to be the one to hog the mic. But does anyone have a question for Sundram?
Sundram, Neil here. Do you have any message for any new arrivals or migrants or refugees? From your experience, any advice?
Okay, I'll share the things that I have done. I think, are you saying about migrants and refugees who are already in Australia on this soil? Neil?
Sorry, what did you say?
No, are you asking my view about migrants who are already here?
Yeah, I am asking for any, from your experience, what advice you can give for new arrivals.
For new arrivals, yeah.
Okay, I think first and foremost, I think there are things, you divide them into two. There are things that you could do, then there are things that you expect others can help you with, okay? So you look at yourself and see, okay, what are the things that I may have to do, I need to do, okay? If my communication is not good, I'm not going to go far, okay? Where can I seek that communication help? If I don't have, support, on other things like, lodging and, travel or food, then I have to seek for it. I can't sit and say, okay, someone is going to come and help me. No, you have to go out and do that. At the same time, you also need to know, okay, who are the people that I should tap into, right? So you really need to have to learn a little bit through the folks that you know, how to navigate your way, who are the right people to ask for the right things, okay? I know it's a journey, it's not a very comfortable way of going, but certainly, and also you need to voice out the sort of things you may need, right? If you're keeping quiet, I think, sure, if you're coming in as a refugee, so forth, you have gone through a lot of challenges, The resilience is already in part of you. In my case, I've been through in a silent way. I was more of a loner, right? I have to fight the battle myself. But when you have, like in Australia, you have already a group that's always looking forward, There's help already could be given to you, when they observe that you're already in a challenging position, people come forward, If they see you standing on the roadside looking a bit lost, they'll ask you, can I help you? During my time now, people just pass by, yeah.
I think that's probably something for those of us who come from Australia or were born in Australia. That's something that we need to remember too, isn't it?
Of course. I think we all have a role to play. I think if you are to ask yourself, what is it if that's my daughter, that's my son? Or what is it if I've been in that position?
Yeah. Any other questions?
Jeanette, Sundram, in the time that you've been here, has the government actually changed some of the rules in comparison for the skilled migrants? So to actually recognise that skill that they carry with them and to get a job, to help them to get the job?
Jeanette, I think it's a good question. In my view, yes, there is a little bit of improvement in terms of recognizing the skills that migrants bring. But let me also say openly, but there are still systemic discrimination that goes on, okay? There are issues, there are prejudices still exist. But don't forget, we have come a long way. Let's not look at it in a negative manner. There is room for it. What we have to do, we have to again share and give them the opportunities. Example, look at how many of the migrants who are really qualified sitting on board levels, right? At the governance level, not many, right? And if you're in the rural regional area, and if you're a woman, that's even worse, right? So I can talk till the cows come home on this issue because there is a gap, okay? But things are improving.
And what about the issue of visas that don't lead to permanent residency? Because I look at that and I think if people really want to stay and make a life here and they are wanting to give back to the community, a permanent residency status or a path to that would make them more reliable members of the community, because in so many ways, so many people come here to work and then they are forced to go home. So they don't sort of become, part of the community in the way that we would want them necessarily to, or the way that they would want to if they had a path to permanent residency. I'm probably not explaining this very well, but do you see that? I mean, we're seeing a lot of people come for very short-term jobs, and then they are forced to return home, even if they don't want to.
Yeah, we are, in some ways, we are a fortunate country compared to many other countries. We may be a lucky country in some ways, but I'm not sure when Bob said we are a clever country. We are a clever country at some level. Maybe we fall short here, okay? We don't see, we don't see that people who come here are very passionate about doing the work, and not only that, they're mingling with the community, and they're wanting to live here. They want to have a good life, and they want to contribute. More importantly, look at them as an asset. Don't look at them as liabilities, Okay.
But it's hard to do that if you think, in 3 years I won't be here.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you have already sown the seed. After 3 years, no, you're gone, Don't expect to stay here any longer. So, I mean, look at the amount of, look at the budget. It's gone into, supporting them temporarily. But if you were to say, look, let's see how you go. Let's go do the 3 years and then the 4 years and the 5 years. And then give them some opportunities, to let them to live and to grow here. I think we're going to reap the benefits,
Yeah, it's very complicated, isn't it?
It is complicated. And once again, local government, state government, federal government have to work together. They have to talk very closely on these issues. They have to come to party. Sorry.
I think we've got time for one last question. Belinda, did you have a question?
Was Belinda? Yeah.
Thanks, Sundram. That was great to hear your breadth of experience over such a long time. I find it, despite the challenges, it seems like over, particularly the last 10 years, community attitudes on the ground, at the grassroots, are changing really rapidly despite those systemic and government barriers. And then we also have at the same time challenges like employment deficits in regional and rural areas. It's almost like the perfect storm, that things have to change, the tide has to turn. What's your opinion? Are you optimistic?
I'm an optimistic person, right? That kept me going, okay? Optimistic in the sense that every small glimpse, every small things that we achieve, I think we have to celebrate. I think we have to celebrate. We have to sow the positivism in people. And we have to say, look, what we had last time, even a good example was the walk, where Neil was carrying his weight, walking around the lake. What was the crowd like today? The crowd has improved. People are beginning to understand, and to me, I think, yes, I often advocate for rural regional Australia, and often in the discussion and all that, they talk as if the rural and regional places don't exist. It's sort of an afterthought or as an adjunct. And I often, remind them, hey, we got about 23% of our population living in regional Australia, and they have to. I think our infrastructures need to improve. Our support, for the migrants who are coming in here, and although the government is encouraging people to go and live in rural regional areas, but then we don't have the infrastructures, the proper infrastructure to support those living, What happens after a few years? They tend to, some of them are going back to the metrocentric areas, whereas others stay here. But now I think the tide is changing a little bit. I think the regions are getting popular in terms of a better living. They begin to understand the quality of life in the regions are better than the metro.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have just one last question for you, Sundram, before we wrap up. And I want to take us all the way back to where we started this conversation with you as the 17-year-old boy on the train station. So if you were to get in your time machine and go back and see that kind of hopeful, slightly frightened young man, what would you say to him? It started a very long, arduous and successful journey, but what would be your advice or your words to him?
I would have told him firstly, find out where you're actually going. Look at the map and look at you're going to a place called Jurong, which is a industrial shipbuilding areas where you're going to be living in all these high-rise skyscrapers and all that. Number two, before you go, make sure you got enough money in your pocket. Because I had 68 ringgits, it's about $30, yeah? Or maybe $28. So thinking, that's it, I've got enough money now to go. So you have to look at that and say, look at that. And thirdly, have your communications, Before you go, have someone there at least who knows that you're coming. I haven't communicated to this friend for 6 months. And then here I was sitting in the train, that night journey, thinking, what happens if he doesn't want to, welcome me? What happened? He says, I don't live here anymore.
Which he didn't.
Which he didn't. So when I knocked on the door, this young lady came and said, oh, hold on, Mummy, someone at the door. And then she said, oh, sorry, son, Raja doesn't live here anymore. And then she's not interested to talk any further. She just slammed the door. And then after that, I just walked down the stairs and I'm thinking, okay, my Lord Ganesha or my dad, what am I going to do now? This is all hustle and bustle. 6 o'clock in the morning, people are, having breakfast and catching the bus and coming back. And here, so busy, but I was so lonely, crying inside me. I don't want to go any further, do I?
Oh, absolutely. But I love how practical you are. You know.
So the communication has to happen. The place that you're going to go to, have some knowledge about it. So I didn't have the communication. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the cash. I was not even prepared. In case if I didn't manage to find him, if I had to return, would I have enough money to return?
But you flew by the seat of your pants, and ultimately it was successful. Sundram, we could talk all night. You have so many stories, but I urge you to read the book instead. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, and thank you for writing this book. It is really a joy to read.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and also it's a pleasure to come here. And may I thank Rural Australian Refugees Group and the others who are all involved to give me this opportunity to come along here. And I'm sure the MC is going to thank all the others as well in a minute. So I don't want to take his punchline. Yeah. So, and also thank you, Prue, for taking the time to read the book. And I hope I've shared my journey with all of you. And thanks again to Brett as well. Brett is standing out. Yeah. Thank you.
I think you've done it. Thank you very much, Sundram, and thank you very much, Prue. Thank you very much to Trades Hall, who have been very kind and generous. Brett Edgington and Rex Hardware, the setup, it's been really good. We really appreciate that very much. Thank you to Wendy for your installation. Thank you for coming along. Sundram is signing books here. Buy a book and take it home and read it. And thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prue. Yeah.